The Jason Rigden Show is recorded in Seattle, Washington in front of a live studio audience of indifferent but cute cats. You can support this podcast by giving us a rating and review on iTunes, sharing this episode on social media, or just by telling a friend about the show. You can also support the show financially on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/Jason Rigden.
My name is Nelson. I am the host of Dixieland of the Proletariat, which is a podcast about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. I'm currently a graduate student studying political science.
And could you tell me a little bit about the podcast? Like, how did you start it and when?
So the podcast started, we had our first episode October of last year. Basically, I was listening to a lot of old podcasts called Pros of the Roundtable, and I was getting into more like revolutionary left radio. And I was listening to them. I was like, and then also I was like, I could do this. And then I was seeing a lot of traction on social media where there's a lot of curiosity about the South. Like you have a whole thing about Appalachia, right? Like people are getting more into Blair Mountain and the labor struggles and the mining wars and whatnot. But there isn't anything talking about the Deep South, which when we say the Deep South, we mean more South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And I really, honest to God, I really got tired of going up north, and because half my family's from New York. And so going up north and hearing from people, asking questions like, do I have sexual relations with my cousin? Do I know any Klansmen? And just these horrible misconceptions about the South. And so I got together with some folks and I was like, hey, I want to do this podcast. Would y'all do it with me? And they're like, yeah. As most projects that I do, I had to do most of the assigning and work and whatever, but they helped. And it's just grown from there. Basically, for instance, our first episode was about Blair Mountain and miners' wars and just coal mining in general, because North Alabama and North Georgia are in the foothills of Appalachia, so there's still a lot of coal mining there. We talked about Kentucky and West Virginia, but then we really got into history of the Deep South, basically. And what happened with that is that people started listening and really liking it, and they wanted to come on and tell their story, which I loved because there's so many people that came on and gave a perspective of the South that is not this bumbling cousin-loving perspective, right? It's everyone thinks the South is just foamy at the mouth reactionaries, and they don't understand that we're the most diverse region of the country, that African Americans are actually the majority, according to the 2010 census, I think 55%, and that you have a vast network of leftists that have had to kind of change how they do things, because yes, we are under a lot of reactionary governments. Obviously the Republican Party in the state of Alabama is extremely reactionary and they have a supermajority. So they're not helping anyone basically, except for their business interests. So you have thriving leftist communities and nonprofits and things to really help people. I tell people in Montgomery, where I am alone, I can go to an LGBTQ community center that's helping homeless people, and then drive 15 minutes and go to a Black-owned community garden and farm. So there really is a vast network of that in the South, and people don't know about that. So I was hoping with the podcast, and which has happened, thankfully, is that we're getting the word out that we aren't a bunch of Klansmen, and that we aren't a bunch of just reactionaries, and that there's a meme going around that I saw that I loved. It was, writing the South off is unsalvageable, is classist and bad. It's not just because your neighborhood has brick oven pizzas and craft brewery places doesn't make it any better.
Why do you think there's this kind of perception of the South that you're talking about here?
I think there's a perception of the South is, because for a long time, I'm not going to deny that for a very, very long time, since I just got out of my Southern politics class, that since its inception, the South has been dominated by the planter class through slavery, Jim Crow, redemption movement, all of that. It was for a very, very long time the dominant white supremacist section of the country. And you grow up reading this in your history books. You have the myth of the lost cause, allowing former Confederates to write history and basically change the narrative of the South and why the Civil War was fought. And then you have just a perception of the South that has just continued, and everyone just thinks through, and it's also through like the media and through literature and just through things that shape the identity of the South that have made people think that it is still the way it was when my grandparents were here, right? And the thing is about perception is that it's perception is what people want to see, and they don't necessarily see the forces behind the scenes that are trying to change this. And I sometimes think that it just makes quote unquote Yankees feel better to be like, they look past the problems in their big cities like Chicago, New York, Boston, LA, and they say, oh, look, we're not, look at the South. I mean, like, yeah, we have our problems, but look at the South. They're bad. But I tell people all the time that they say, what's the South like? And I kind of do this biting, I guess, sarcasm back at them in the way Southerners do so well, especially older Southerners. It was like, oh yeah, the South has its problems, and we've progressed to the point of that liberal racism, that New England style racism y'all are used to. So, we've caught up to the rest of the country when it comes to its racism.
So it seems like your primary kind of target audience, I suppose, are people outside of the South. How have people like within the South kind of reacted to the show?
They love it. The reaction has been extremely positive from all sections of the South. Like I said, we've had people from the indigenous community come on, people from the Black community come on, people from the LGBTQ community come on, and it's very positive in the leftist community. We haven't had any backlash. Like, there's no like reaction. They don't really care. I'm guessing, like, oh my goodness, what are they doing? Much communists. It's like, we've been dealing with that since all of us became politically active. We have to deal with that. But the reaction in the South has been extremely positive. Like I said, we have people from all over, from Louisiana to North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, like all places wanting to come on and tell their story, because like us, they feel that the narrative is that the South, like I said, is still that Jim Crow era, foaming at the mouth, George Wallace, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever type deal. And so they're like, thank you for doing this, and thank you for telling people our story and telling people that we're not like that anymore. We have people that are actively trying to change it, and they just get so tired of the narrative from Yankee liberals that say, oh, just let the South go. Oh, we should nuke the South. I saw on Twitter one time, it was y'all would rather nuke the South and let it go than talk to Black people and try to like get them and try to like organize the working class in the South. And I was like, God, it's so true. I hear it so many times. Like, there's books written about it. Just let the South go. Let them fend for themselves. But what they don't realize is that, like I said, the South is the most diverse region of the country, and you're throwing so many people under the bus that you profess to love in your everyday. You're like, we support the Black community, we support the LGBT community. Well, what about them in the South? Is you're like, just let the South go, let it rot, let it die. We pay for all the South stuff, blah, 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 et cetera. I've heard it all. But when they say that, they're essentially giving up on people like us, like leaders in the Black community, leaders in the LGBT community, leaders in the immigrant community that are actively trying to save the South from itself. Because I will say, as a Southerner, that we are dominated by a reactionary class that keeps us down. And as we're seeing in Georgia, it can change if people come together and get out and actively try to change the situation.
Yeah, do you think that you are winning, or your political ideals are winning against these reactionaries who do seem like they have kind of a stranglehold on politics in certain regions?
I think that in areas, so backtrack real quick. Like I said, I just took my just got out of my Southern politics class, which I took one in undergrad and I took one in graduate. And the the overall notion of the South is that when things change, first it changes on the rims, and then it comes into the deep South. So you see the rim South with Georgia. I mean, not Georgia. Wow, that's the deep South. The rim South: Texas, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. Right? You see the tides changing in those areas. You see in Texas, may not flip next election, but in my lifetime, hopefully even sooner, it will. You see in Virginia, the Democrats have taken back their state legislature. You see in North Carolina, they have a Democratic governor. Florida goes back and forth because Florida messes up everything, as we saw from 2000 and even now. But when demographics change, that's when change happens. So, for instance, we're looking at Georgia right now and what caused Georgia to flip. And what we're seeing now is that the suburbs that have traditionally gone for white Republicans, even back in 94 when Newt Gingrich and his Republican revolution happened, he even talks about the suburbs and how like they're the bastion of white Republicanism. And he uses a bunch of racist dog whistles to prove that. But then you see now how demographics have changed. You have the black vote coming out in droves in the Atlanta metro area, but then also the suburbs that were traditionally white Republicans are now becoming more liberal because the Democratic Party is shifting to the party of educated white liberals. And so that coalition that's building in the suburbs and the urban areas is causing Georgia to flip. So, for instance, Newt Gingrich's seat that he held as Speaker of the House in the 90s in Georgia is now Democrat. So it was actively very strong Republican seat, and now it's a Democratic seat. So when the demographics change, you see change actually happen. And the demographics in Georgia have changed, one, because Atlanta is the largest growing metro area in the nation. It's the largest growing section of the country. But also people like Stacey Abrams and Killer Mike and leaders in the black community have energized the base of the Democratic Party, which is always since the Voting Rights Act has been the black vote. And so they're energized, they're ready to go, and they want change. Now, I will say this before I piss off like my orthodox leftist followers: the Democratic Party has a lot of problems, and I am not necessarily one that's like excited to vote for Democrats, especially Joe Biden and other Democrats, because I don't think that the vehicle of change per se is going to be the Democratic Party. They have always had a reactionary wing that keeps progress from happening. Like I say, the Republicans, at least you know what they stand for. You know that you know that they hate you. But the Democratic Party will smile to your face while it stabs you in the back. And so I think that any change away from the reactionary Republicans in the South towards Democrats is positive, but it can't just stop there. It's like the rest of the country is saying like, hey, Democratic Party, the progressives are saying the Democratic Party is rotten and blah, 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 and they're doing their thing. And then you have like, oh, the Democratic Party. And then you have the South who's like, hey, let's go back to the Democrats. Like, it's like a trickle down effect almost, where you have people say like, people turning away from the Democratic Party and saying we need a more progressive left-wing party, et cetera. Then you have people in parts of the country that are like, oh, Democratic establishment. Then you have the South who's just like, hey guys, sorry we're late to the party. Yeah, Democrats are good. And it's just like, it's like we are behind and we need to catch up. But telling us that we're just a bunch of stupid rednecks is not helping. So hopefully people will learn to be like, hey, yes, is it perfect that the two Senate candidates from Georgia, like, are they perfect? No, they're not perfect, but they're better than the alternative. And so I hate that whole lesser of two evils notion, because like I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. I want to vote for the people that I want to vote for. But like I said, I voted for Doug Jones because Roy Moore's the devil. And I voted for Doug Jones again because Tubby Tuberville is also the devil. But do I really like Doug Jones? Not really. I think he's as bland as mayonnaise, but he's better than the alternative. That being said, I've always said that voting is just a tool and it should not be the end all be all of any sort of change in the country. It's just a tool and a one big bag of things that we could do to hopefully change the country.
So with the South changing, how is the right reacting to this? Are they like doubling down on their voter suppression and stuff?
So like the South is once you think you have it pinned down, it changes because like for instance in Georgia, I thought that the state Democrats would fight tooth and nail. I mean, not the state Republicans would just be lockstep in with Trump and like be like, oh, it's bad and there was fraud and everything. But then again, they're like, hold on, we run the election, so if Trump is saying that it's fraud and bad, then that means that we're incompetent. Which I mean, they are incompetent, but they're not. It's the fraud doesn't exist. Trump is just being Trump. And so I was kind of shocked when like the Republican governor, like Kemp and other Republican leaders were like, no, like it's fair. Like Joe Biden won, you lost, get over it. It's weird because like I said, we just got done talking about this in class that you see like when Shelby versus Holder in 2013 and you see the rise of like voter ID laws. And while in my heart, I hate them and I think that they're bad, an unintended backlash from these is that Black people have gone out in droves and gotten their IDs and voter turnout amongst the Black population has gone up. And it's one of those things like they understand systematic oppression and they understand that just a generation before their grandparents were being attacked for trying to vote. So they're like, no, we're not going to go back to that. You want to make us get IDs? We're going to go get IDs and we're going to vote you out of office. The problem, though, is that with gerrymandering and things like that, change is really going to have to come from statewide offices and then hopefully somehow trickle down to the legislative. But I think that the backlash, I see more backlash from the Pacific Northwest and bigger cities than I have ever seen in the South, right? So Atlanta did pop off for a bit, but I look at the Pacific Northwest and like, my God, like I have never seen. I'm 30 years old. I've lived in Montgomery, Alabama for 30 years. I have never once seen somebody like fly a swastika around. Like I think maybe one time like the National Socialist Movement came to Montgomery to like do something and they were at the Capitol and it was just them, like no one else showed up. Everyone was just like, what the fuck are these morons doing? I will say that there's a lot of Confederate flags. Like there are a lot of Confederate flags, and you can make the argument that the Confederate flag and the swastika are one and the same. But what I mean is like I have not seen open jackbooted fascist thugs walking the streets like we've seen in the Pacific Northwest, right? What we have to deal with is like the good old boy pickup truck with the Confederate flag. And they kind of like hide and wait. And it's kind of like, it's very tense in that, it could pop off if it really wanted to, but for some reason it kind of is at a standstill. That's not to say that like things haven't popped off, which they have, especially in bigger places like Atlanta. But it's one of those things where like I think that the leadership was learning from history and they know that they can appease by doing little things like they took down the Confederate flags at the State House in Montgomery. I know Confederate flags have been moved. Mississippi just changed its flag. I think that they understand like liberal reforms to hold off an inevitable uprising. And it's hard to pin down. To an overall answer is I haven't seen an extensive backlash. I think that has happened because the establishment Republican reactionary Tea Party, whatever, knows that in the Deep South, to an extent, they don't feel threatened. Now, when they do feel threatened is when things are going to probably pop off. So they haven't felt threatened yet, but if they ever do, then I think that you'll have a problem.
So I'm here in Seattle right now. You were talking about, your perspective of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
What did you think? What do you think about like these ongoing protests in Portland and what we had here of the CHOP in Seattle?
Man, we always thought y'all were a bunch of peace-loving hippies that smoked dope and just chilled. And like you have your grunge music, which is sad, but then we all thought that this was just like some bastion of like progressive thought. But then like I had people tell me that you leave this Seattle, like you leave the coast and you go inland and it's just basically Mississippi. And and it's just like, but like even worse because like I said, and it's like you have like Portland and then you have Seattle and then the rest is like Alabama, Mississippi, but like Alabama, Mississippi from like the 50s. Like it just seems, it goes back to that threat. It's like there's a famous political scientist, V.O. Key Jr. He came up with the racial threat hypothesis where it's like areas of the country or areas basically in the South where there's majority African American population, the white people are going to be the most racist because they feel that once they lose power, that's it for them. Like they'll never have any say in whatever, et cetera. So that's why you saw like the most adamant racists and the most adamant apartheid Jim Crow laws in the Black Belt, like Lowndes County, in Alabama, Lowndes County, Dallas County, Montgomery County, because they're majority Black counties. And so the white people are like freaking out that like if Black people ever got the right to vote and they ever came into power that they would, I don't know if they were thinking about white genocide back then, but they were like, we'll never have power, we'll lose it, and then we'll be subjugated and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know what what it's like in the Pacific Northwest, but it's just we all found it weird. Like Seattle and Portland and Oregon and Washington State would pop off like that. I mean, granted, it goes back to perception. I'm sure that people have this perception up there that the South is, a bunch of dueling banjos and Confederate flags, and we all thought that y'all were a bunch of, hippies that, loved each other. But then we saw what CHOP and we saw like everything happening in Portland and Seattle. And then I started like looking in the history of like Oregon, and like Oregon was founded basically as a white supremacist state. And like Black people weren't even allowed to move there until like 1912, like the early 20th century. And it's like, wow. It's like, I thought Alabama was bad. Holy shit. But I don't know, with CHOP and Chaz, what it was called. I don't know, I guess, we all thought, hey, way to go. I mean, we obviously, like looking at it from a distance, are like, there's going to be some problems and there's no way this is ever going to last. But we were like, roll tide, y'all. Do your thing. Then we were also shocked that y'all had so many guns. We were like, man, we thought that these places didn't have a lot of guns. And it's like, holy shit. I was like, Yankees are liking guns now. This is crazy. But I don't know. It really, I was taken aback by like the overt fascism in like the Proud Boys and like other like groups up there that there's so many of them that you could probably name off, but like just like driving, I was like, what is like they have pickup trucks and they're like, what is this? What is happening? I just we couldn't comprehend. I couldn't comprehend. I was like, what am I like? Is this Wetumpka, Alabama? Or is this Seattle, Washington? And I was like, I think I might have saw a Confederate flag or two. I was like, oh, I saw it when I was in the Catskills in New York. I saw like 2 Confederate flags up there, like driving through and a bunch of Trump signs. I was like, am I back home? Is this like Opp, Alabama? Or is this like Jefferson, New York? Like, what is this? But I think that kind of threw us off a lot. And then we had to look into the history of things and realize the demographics and talking, because the social media has really given us the ability to talk to people in different parts of the country, parts of the world. And they're like, no, like you have like the cities and you leave the city and it turns into dueling banjos. And it's, I don't know. I remember just watching images of like white dudes with pickup trucks and just being like openly fascist towards things, just like that. And it was like, what the fuck?
Well, the United States is a really big country. And we break it down into like, the Northwest or the Northeast or the South. But even within those regions, they're big. It's hard to talk about any of these regions with any kind of like consistency or coherency. Do you have a problem yourself doing a show that kind of focuses on the South? Like covering all the different textures, maybe?
I mean, that's a good point, because what I try to tell people is that, so there's another podcast. I really hope I'm pronouncing this right, because I hate it when people pronounce like my last name wrong. It's very Italian, and I hate when Trillbillies. I really hope that I'm pronouncing that right, and I'm sorry if I'm not, y'all. Great podcast. they focus a lot on Appalachia, right? And so I respect what they're doing, and I've listened to them, and they're very good podcasts. I tell everyone should listen to them for that perspective on Appalachia, right? So even within the South, and we kind of categorize the South as the former Confederate states, which includes a swamp of Appalachia. So, but that culture in there is totally different than what we have in the Deep South. So the foothills of Appalachia come into like North Georgia and Alabama, but like Eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, that part of like Western Virginia, like all through there is a different culture than what we have in the Deep South. For instance, like Eastern Tennessee, like I think 40,000 of them broke away and fought for the Union. You have mountain Republicans in Appalachia that were adamantly Republican all through Reconstruction and even afterwards. West Virginia obviously broke away from Virginia because of the Civil War. They're like, we're not, fuck this. We don't have slaves. Why are we fighting for this? When it comes to Articles of Secession in the South, Appalachia overwhelmingly voted against secession. It was the planter class in the Black Belt in the Deep South that were the ones that pushed for segregation. I mean, for breaking away and forming the Confederacy. So when the regions, they are very big and they are different. Like Texas culture is different from Alabama, was different from the foothills. I mean, from the Appalachian Hills in North Carolina and West Virginia and Kentucky, right? I know no one who's ever coal mined. I don't know a thing about coal mining. I know there's coal, it's in the ground, you get it, it sucks. Like you're probably going to die and get black lung. It is a horrible job that I would never want, and it's just bad. But we went on a podcast, Mandatory OT, which is the IWW's podcast in West Virginia, and we were talking about that, and we might have brought it up. It's been a while, but like I wanted to say, like, you know, like I said, I know nobody that's coal mined. I think there are some coal mines in North Alabama, but in the Deep South, I know no one who's ever coal mined. But Appalachia, like that's their thing, is like labor struggles through mining, where ours is labor struggle, not even labor, is the civil rights movement from Reconstruction to the 1970s. Like our demographic is completely different. It was really funny when I was on with my co-host Tommy, who's black, and we went on the Mandatory OT podcast, and I told we joked around with Tommy. It was like, you know, Tommy, this is probably the first time I ever heard like a black person talk, because like you don't really see that in the foothills of Appalachia. And like obviously for people listening, there are black people in Appalachia. There's doing great work, but it was like kind of that joke where it's like in the Deep South, it's majority black, and so like you have a lot of times interaction between white and black people that is a great thing, and it breaks down a lot of boundaries. But then you have places in the South that have extremely white density, and black people are not there, and studies have shown that those places tend to be more racist now because they've never experienced black people. And so like that was like the joke with Tommy. And but going back to the original thing, it's like, you know, South Florida is the South. Like Florida is a southern state, right? But South Florida is completely different than Mississippi. So when we focus on Southern working class history, it does really pertain a lot to the Deep South, which is, like I said, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. But we would like to talk about things that have happened in other Southern states that are not necessarily in the Deep South. Like in North Carolina, there's the Wilmington race riots that led to a coup d'etat of the state government in 1898. There's the Memphis riots. There's obviously immigration issues in Texas. You know, history of things going on in Florida, especially with Cuban immigrants in South Florida. You know, there's like so much stuff to talk about in the South, but we do have to sometimes narrow down the framework to look at a specific part of a specific section of the South, because that's what we know. And I'm not going to talk extensively about Appalachia because I know nothing really about that region. Just like, you know, if we're going to talk about Texas, we'd like to bring someone on from Texas. Like if we're going to talk about Appalachia, we're going to hopefully bring someone on from that region to talk about it. If Florida is the same way. So yes, the regions are very big, but then they are diverse and they are different. So we try to talk about specific parts of said regions that we know of. So like I said, the Deep South.
So you've been doing this podcast for a little while now. Do you have any advice for folks maybe thinking about starting kind of a leftist podcast?
You really got to find your niche. So like I said, we do Southern working class history and current events. I think the most important thing is don't get burned out. Also, start small. Like, don't really try to bring on a lot of people to quote unquote host all at once. You don't really necessarily have to. I would say that like you really like equipment wise, it's going to get expensive. But like you can get a USB microphone and some headphones, and it will sound just as good as this massive setup that I have that I was able to get with my unemployment money. I think that one of the big things that people need to worry about is money. With our podcast, we do have a Patreon, and we decided very early on, because money causes a lot of problems, that we were going to donate our surplus to groups that are run by and or help marginalized people directly. So I take what it costs to run the podcast out, and the rest, that would be the surplus, goes to one of those groups. We've donated to a Black-led community organizing quote-unquote Maoist group in St. Louis. We've donated to a bunch of GoFundMes. We've donated to food banks. We've donated to just basically anything that helps people. That's not like a big corporate thing that like the overhead, like the majority of the money goes to overhead and not helping people. I think that going in, you should know what you want to talk about. You should have like 1 or 2 episodes at least planned out, so you're not just flying by the seat of your pants. It may take a while for you to pop off, but it will happen. Just make sure like financially you know what you're going into, especially when it comes to hosting sites. Make sure that you start off just like you may just buy a certain amount of space that you think will help starting off, and then as you set up your Patreon and people come on, you raise more money with that, then you can upgrade to more storage space, I'm guessing, when it comes to downloads and things like that. But just, if you want to start a podcast, excuse me, if you want to start a podcast now, obviously with COVID going on, make sure you pick a format, a platform when it comes to recording virtually. It's going to work for you. Zoom is good, but it has its problems when you have more than 2 people on. Zencaster is good, but there's no video option. So you just have to figure out what works for you. I've had people do it on Discord, Zencaster, Zoom, just any sort of thing that works like that. Also, this really just comes down to money, like everything in life. Just make sure that you have the means to keep doing it. Don't feel like you have to put out something every week. Like one of my favorite podcasts that's now defunct did like maybe 1 or 2 episodes a month, but they were like 2-hour long, in-depth history episodes. So figure out what you want to do. It may be like a one-on-one interview like we're doing now with just one host. It may be something where you want to bring on 5 hosts. It may be something where you want to talk about just what's going on from the perspective of what you're doing. Maybe something you want to do with history. So it's just like, find what you want to do, have a budget, and go for it.
And it sounds like you're a podcast listener too. Do you have any shows you really recommend to folks?
Yeah. I despise them as a thing, because they are just extremely wealthy and now of what they've done, and I'm just I don't know, they have their problems, but a guilty pleasure is Chapo Trap House. I like their interviews. I take what they say kind of with a salt, just like something to listen to on the way to work. When it comes to really, also another one of mine is the Talking Sopranos podcast. I like that one just because I like the Sopranos. But when it comes to actual like learning something about left-wing politics, I really love Revolutionary Left Radio. Rev Left Radio, Brett is what he's able to do is phenomenal. Get people on and really have an in-depth conversation. I've learned a lot. I've learned probably more with that podcast than I have in class or like through my readings. And so like if anyone wants to listen to how a podcast is done the right way, I would listen to Revolutionary Left Radio. So I really like his stuff. I want to get more into your stuff. You sent me the stuff on the email, the things that you've done. So I would like to listen to more. If you just, after we're done recording, send me some links of where I can find your stuff. But like, I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, definitely that one.
And where can the listeners learn more about you and your show?
So basically, we were on a lot more platforms, but with our episode when it came to No Evil Foods and the union busting, I don't know how much I don't think there's no impending. Like, we have 2 episodes about it, so if you want to listen, people can listen. But basically, we had disagreements with some platforms, and so we're on. We host through Libsyn. We're on like Spotify, Apple, Castbox, podcast, whatever. Like, just basically, if you type in Dixieland or the Proletariat, you'll find us. So we're not on YouTube, we're not on SoundCloud, but we're on most every other streaming site. I mean, we have like 31 episodes up right now. We're working on 32, and we're trying to fix some stuff and get moving. And we've had a bunch of like life events, like our school and families and things, and COVID. So we're trying to get back in the swing of things. But yeah, for the most part, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then if you want to hear what we have to say, I think the top 3, I think Spotify, Apple, Castbox, Podcast Addict, things like that. And Libsyn, obviously.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Would you just hold on for just a minute?
Yeah, no problem.
Let me just get my stuff. All right. So how do you feel about the interview? I didn't really get into the No Evil Foods, but I figured that had been covered pretty well on your show and other places. And I think talking about more of your show, I think I like the direction you're going, so I just kind of went with it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. No, it was definitely cool for sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I spent all morning listening to your show. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because I listened to some episodes previously, but I was like, oh, I've got a few hours. I'm just going to listen. And yeah, you're doing really, really great work, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I'm going to try to get this out. Well, I shouldn't make promises about when I get my shows out. I'm terrible about it.
No, I totally agree. We've done that before, and it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, I do a local Seattle show, and recently I found out that I did an interview in July that I never released. I thought I did.
It's all good.
Luckily, the author is like
Yeah,
totally cool, a fan of the show. He's like, oh yeah, you'll put it out eventually.
Yeah, put it out eventually. We have one that we've been sitting on for like 3 weeks now. We need to put out. So I feel you.
Yeah. And is anything else happening? I mean, Libsyn, with your hosting, they've taken care of you so far, right?
Yes, Libsyn, I have to say, shout out. I mean, I'm not getting paid for this. This is not like a corporate sponsorship, but what I have to say, hosting Libsyn, when it came to the problems with No Evil Foods, like I said, we have 2 episodes dedicated to that. When it comes to the problems with No Evil Foods, there's also real quick, basically it had to do with copyright issues. So some recordings. Vice News has an article out about it. It's very good. I'll send it to you if you want to tag it in the show notes or anything like that.
I folled the whole thing, and it's wild.
Oh, hell yeah.
I mean, cool.
Dude, it's so wild.
Like, the copyright stuff is one of my pet topics, and I've seen it more and more used as a political weapon against dissent.
Yeah, exactly. But no, Libsyn, we actually talked to a person, and he was just like, yeah, this is bullshit. And so they fixed it up right away. And shout out to Libsyn. They're great. If anyone wants to host a podcast, I would suggest them. SoundCloud, not so much.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. So we're not on that platform anymore. But yeah, I think that with that whole situation, I would definitely, like I said, I'm not getting, this isn't an endorse.
No, I mean, I use them. I've been using them since like 2005, like in various projects for years and years. They've always been great. They're always on it. And like, when you're making, this won't be in the show. When you're making political content, I think, especially right now, as we see, you really have to be like thinking about like consequences, right? Because you're going to probably make people upset. And, you know, one thing about some platforms, maybe like SoundCloud or like YouTube, you know, they won't stand behind you. And it seems like in the past, Libsyn has been pretty much, they stand behind their creators. As long as you're not doing anything that's like, actually a person will take a look and make a judgment, you know, whereas on YouTube, it's automated, you know?
Definitely. Because like I said, like, I don't know if this is going to be in the show or not, but I could, it was trying to deal with SoundCloud. It was like, they're trying to get up with them was just impossible. And you talk to like a robot. I mean, when they tried to they tried to pull it again with Apple.
Yeah.
But Apple, even I do have to say, for all of Apple's problems, they are pretty. They saw their error and they're like, yeah, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
But we had help from a nonprofit law firm that deals with copyright stuff, so they helped us out. And like I said, Libsyn 100% go with Libsyn because they're great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you got it. I mean, that company just sounds. I've ranted about that. When did you first do your first episode? Was that all the way back in August? No.
I have.
I mean, time is all weird right now. I feel like it was August. I remember telling people about what was going on and telling about, and then the takedowns. And
yeah, I should really timestamp these episodes, but I make you look it up real quick. But yeah, but the first one, they hit us up, the union organizers, and they're like, hey, because they were making the rounds and trying to get the word out. We're like, hell yeah, for sure. And so we got it on. We put in the audio files in question that were completely legal. They tried to pull this with like bigger podcasts and things like that, and they were like, no. Yeah. So basically, they talked about it, but like the stuff that they told us about with just the bullshit that like No Evil Foods was doing to them, and you have like this, it just so disgusting how you have this company that kind of tries to brand itself as like hipster and progressive and co-opting like leftist socialist terms like comrade something and socialist salami. I don't know what the vegan stuff, but then like are so adamantly anti-union and tried to like do this like warp the thing. Try to make union work and organizing and labor struggle like detach that from socialism, when historically the labor movement has been the vehicle for any sort of like working class revolution and any sort of thing like that. So it was just, but then you find out later in the second episode that they're basically funded by venture capitalists, and they're
not a real business, right?
Yeah, they're not this like, I always thought that they were just a bunch of like liberal hipsters that got a loan from mommy and daddy and started this thing and like, oh great, look at us, we're vegan, yay. But turns out that they're just they're got all their capital from venture capitalists that fund them, and they've turned into this $1 million company through all that bullshit. And that's one of the reasons why they're so anti-union. And they hired like, I think one of the best anti-union law firms in the country to come in and help bust the union. But the good news is that the National Labor Relations Board found that No Evil Foods violated the Wagner Act, and they have talks in the work with all that coming. I don't know how much I can say, but like with they told us after the episode some stuff, but like afterwards, what's going to happen with that? But No Evil Foods legally has been declared by the National Labor Relations Board as being in the wrong. So that was always good.
I also was really annoyed with just their co-opting of kind of leftist imagery and stuff like that. It just seems so cynical.
That but real quick, if you don't mind me just touching on that for a second. Reading Lenin's State and Revolution, right? He talks about this like 100 years ago, and that like everyone now, he's like, everyone's calling themselves Marxists, like the great German Marx. It's like all these people that like are not Marxists are now saying that they're Marxists. And I was listening to I know he's problematic and people hate him, but I really like him, Slavoj Žižek, some of his videos. And he was like, I call myself a communist because I don't say socialist because everyone's a socialist. This is like, it's like Rose Twitter has, it's just like everyone, socialism has, this term has been taken and co-opted by liberals and progressives that want to sound cool. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm a socialist. And then when you ask them about what they believe, it's just like basically really watered down social democracy. Or even not even that. It's just like everyone's a socialist. Like, I've had people be like, oh yeah, I'm a socialist, I like the police department. And it's just like, what? No, that's not what we're talking about. But yeah, so it's just the commodification of image, of socialist imagery, because I think Marx even talked about that, like that'll happen. It's like why you see Che Guevara t-shirts and why you see like things of that nature like going around and becoming popular. It was just another step in that. It's just another step in like, taking something veganism, even of itself, has now become like a white liberal thing. And when it used to be, you know, people were just too poor to get like Irish, Italian immigrants and like just immigrants in general, just too poor to afford meat. So they were vegetarians, vegans, because it was too expensive to buy those things. And so now veganism has become like this like white liberal thing. And it's really funny to see like white liberal vegans like go after like indigenous people, because the indigenous people have this beautiful tradition of a culture like based around like living off the land and being in touch with nature. And especially with we had an episode with indigenous people on talking about the buffalo and how the buffalo was such a thing to the plains indigenous people, and how like they would use every single part of the buffalo and they would be thankful for the buffalo. And when the white man came in, killed all the buffalo, decimated the indigenous population. But obviously they ate the buffalo. And so you have like white liberals be like, eating meat is wrong. And you have like indigenous activists being like, oh, it's part of our culture. Like this is the thing. Like this is the thing our ancestors did. Like we live off the land. And like, no, that's wrong. Like you can't eat meat. You know, the fish have feelings too, and it's things like that. But like it's just like the next step of that was these white liberals co-opting socialist names to promote their bullshit company.
Yep.
Like overpriced fake meat that they sell at Whole Foods for like a markup of this insane amount. I mean, I could rant about it for days, but it's just like, oh God, it's just like massive eye roll. Just like, come on, people, like really? But yeah, I think that a lot of people now are seeing how bullshit No Real Foods was from our episode, from IWW podcast episode. So I'm just like a Valley Labor Report in Alabama. Just like a bunch of people are now saying that like, hey, No Real Foods is bullshit. So hopefully something will come out of it. I mean, obviously they'll probably just continue to be or whatever, because the majority of people who eat No Real Foods food are white liberals in the suburbs who just don't care, and they're just going to keep buying it because, oh, this is so cool. So like, but at least we've put out there, so if people want to find out, they can find out how much of a bullshit company they are.
Yeah. Do you mind if I put in this second part?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that was great. Do you want to plug your show one more time?
Yeah, for sure. Dixieland, the Proletariat, Southern working class history and current events, the leftist perspective. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, or wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on social media at Dixie Prole, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We're not on Parler because Parler is the devil. Even though Facebook's the devil, just because Facebook's the devil doesn't mean Parler is any better.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
You've been listening to The Jason Rigden Show. More information and links for our guests are in the show notes. For more information about this show, visit jasonrigden.com. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, email jasonrigden@gmail.com or leave a voicemail at 425-835-2766. Our theme music is Bush Week by Nihilor and used under the Creative Commons Attribution License. This episode is copyrighted by Jason Rigden in 2020 and is freely available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. Thanks for listening and have a great day.